Christian Rao, Locked on Kansas State. This is a tweet. I want to give some context to this of West Virginia, Iowa State, other schools in the Big 12, specifically public schools, dropping out of Division I altogether because of the money that's asked, the $22 million in revenue sharing, and the way that NIL and the transfer portal have wrecked all of college athletics. We understand schools are going broke. Will they drop out of D1? That was a quote that the Big East commissioner gave, is that this could be an option for some universities that can't afford it. Then a tweet from Sky is this person's account, who accused Kuz, who's a big Greg Flugar, a couple of the guys who are on the Big 12 Mafia channel, of saying that West Virginia is likely going to drop out of Division I. They can't afford upcoming Power 4 landscape with revenue share, NIL, coaching budgets ballooning. Come to find out, that quote was not featured in the Big 12 Mafia channel, but it did spark a massive conversation of how legitimate this could be. Can schools afford to stick around? The example I usually give, Jamie Pollard at Iowa State. He has been very public that they had to cancel a new wrestling facility and improvements to Hilton Coliseum because they're saving money to give the student athletes coming forward. These schools are going broke. Missouri, their basketball coach is pulling a microphone during a game and saying, "Don't storm the court. We need the money. We can't afford this." Public schools that aren't Ohio State, that aren't Alabama, that aren't LSU, are by and large going broke over the way the NCAA, the way the United States government is directing them to pay student athletes going forward. Do you see a world where schools that can't afford to keep up with what college football is now demanding will have to cut back entirely on athletics to the point where D1, the Big 12, the bright lights aren't viable for them?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a space race, and I'm not talking UCF in this case, but it's really just the fact of moving forward and finding always ways to compete.
UCF and Houston. Just going to throw that out there. They'll get mad.
Absolutely.
They'll get mad.
Yep, you're right. And I should make sure that this played in there. But no, you're always finding a way to compete and making sure that you are the better one, the one that's there first, or even has the better facilities, because not only are you utilizing the same George Washingtons and everybody else to make sure that you are bringing in those players, but you also have to entice them as well. And we were noticing that that's just a really tough thing to do, to compare and compete against some of those top public schools, as you mentioned. I thought this quote really brought in some interesting dialogue, and I know that wasn't exactly the quote that was said on the show, but it really did, really spark some interest, as you mentioned. My mind did shift to those new schools that just entered from the G5 to the Power 4 conferences, like Cincinnati, like UCF. That would be potentially ones at risk. But I think West Virginia is one of those schools that you would have to pay attention to, watch out for. Iowa State, I mean, even Kansas State, although they're made a step forward with their NIL budget this past year, especially on the basketball side. Avery Johnson tied for 24th, according to On3, of the most paid player in NIL, $1.8 million. It's just, there's a lot of people, a lot of teams that are going to struggle with keeping up with, dare I say, the Ohio States and Alabamas. It's not a tough thing, or not an easy thing to do, Drake.
No, not at all. And there will be universities that have to find public schools specifically. Baylor is a unique case because they're, being a private school, they can do a lot. They have a lot more flexibility to dictate how they spend their money, with the federal government a lot less worried about where the Bears, where TCU put those dollars. And they also have Drayton McClain, who owned the Houston Astros for a long time and can dump money into the university, and the government doesn't really have the opportunity to look at that the same way they would a major donor at Oklahoma State or at Kansas State. So my worry is not about these private schools, about SMU or a Baylor or Notre Dame. It's instead about Kansas State, West Virginia. I mean, states that are going to struggle to support major universities and be able to help pay these bills. As it sits for Kansas State, especially with Kansas being right there, you're trying to support, as a more blue collar area, support two major universities. Is there enough money to be comfortable, if you're Kansas State, moving forward in the way that in the direction college athletics is going?
Right now, it seems like it's okay, but I feel like I would not be doing any service if I said that in the longevity standpoint, there's a huge concern about the potential of maybe not being able to keep up. Because right now you think you're doing okay. You saw with the basketball side, they were willing to spend, like a Coleman Hawkins, $2 million just to come for 1 year to Manhattan. As I already mentioned with Avery Johnson, you've been willing to spend that money to make it happen. But how long can that keep going? And I think we're going to see that not only with Kansas State, you're going to see it with other teams in the Big 12 as well. Going back to this quote in this conversation, the Big 12 Mafia with West Virginia, he mentions the big promotion, the big money change with the defensive coordinator. The old defense coordinator is making about $700,000 a year. Now it's making 1.5. That's a double in price just for your coordinator, and that's a huge change. So not only are you going to be able to not be able to pay your players, but now you have to worry about your coaching staff as well. There's a lot of issues that you have to continue to build on. And if you're not bringing in enough money to continue paying on this inflated rate, and I know you're sick of hearing about inflation. I mean, have you seen the price of eggs lately? It's not the only thing that's happening in the world, Drake, that's rising in prices. Things like this with athletics and coaching staffs are doing the same thing.
Yeah, I'm not happy with where college athletics is going from the standpoint of universities themselves, like Kansas State, struggling in comparison to an Ohio State. That gap is only going to widen now. And this even kind of goes back to our original conversation about, selling off to a venture capital group if you're the Big 12. Finding unique ways to make money is going to be key. If you are Kansas State University, sponsored by Allstate, again, I'm okay with that. I have no issue if it keeps you alive and keeps you on the forefront. But we are in an era, and it blows my mind a little bit, where Avery Johnson is making more money than his offensive and defensive coordinator. Yep.
And it's bananas
for me. That's a lot for me to like process. That's just how.
Yeah, and he's going to be going into his second full season as quarterback. Now, obviously, he would have been highly sought after as a quarterback elsewhere if he would have entered the transfer portal, and there's a reason behind why they threw money at him. But I do think there's a better strategy behind it of why you should spend a certain money. And by no means am I saying that they shouldn't have paid Avery Johnson, but I think you got to find better ways to be creative with the money that you're not going to have as much of compared to the Alabamas and the Notre Dames with these huge budgets and huge donor lists. And although the government is changing the way that NIL and how the collectives are going to be looked at, you're still, and although we're also seeing a lot more parity in this league as well, and when I mean league, I mean the entire nation in sports, there's still going to be this huge disconnect and this huge gap between where we sit right now and where those top 5 programs in the country are. And I don't know if right now, even with private equity, if that can be adjusted.
Yeah, there are like 10 schools that can win a national championship in football. That's pretty much the 10 that are going to have the opportunity to do it.
And it's
forward.
all money, right? And it's all money.
Yep. Yes, unless you're Oregon. And for some reason, you should be in that 10, and you're just kind of not. Like you have Nike, but you still can't. Coming up, there's a new rule proposed that I hope passes, and it would just doom the SEC. This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Kansas State crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hey, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Why? Because of course it is. FanDuel is exactly where I go during the NBA or college basketball season. I've been in Miami the entire weekend, and the Heat were playing. I want to throw some money on the Heat versus the Spurs. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. Even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet the fourth quarter comeback, you can. If you're looking for a great payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love the live betting feature because it's the fourth quarter and my favorite team's down by 5, and I just know they're going to come back. I can still put a wager on the game with FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA.